This is a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Program funding is made possible with your membership and with corporate support from Casey Peterson, LTD Financial Advisors and CPAs, helping organizations, businesses, and individuals achieve their financial goals since 1977. And by Rapid City Attorney Brian Haig of Haig & Haig Law Firm, who characterized the flood this way: "Out of tragedy came a strong resolve to rebuild a better Rapid City. This is our legacy." Support for SDPB documentaries is also provided by the Leo P. Flynn Estate, Kitty Kinsman and Steve Zelmer, and by Charles and Kay Ryder.
The Rapid City Mayor, Don Barnett, said a few minutes ago, it's been about 10:40 p.m., that any citizens living on property abutting Rapid Creek should leave immediately. He said all of those properties throughout the city should be abandoned. The mayor said that, to quote, "The situation is going to get a lot worse before it gets better," unquote.
I just remember that there wasn't any water, and then there was.
It happened so damn fast.
And just literally in seconds, the water's up to my knees and stuff, and the current is so strong, we couldn't make it.
Pretty soon there was a great big log came up right by the windshield.
I remember stuff coming through the speedometer, water coming through the speedometer, and it opened up the glove compartment and, you know, all of the radio.
There was no swimming that night. I'm telling you, you were just moving with the current, and as fast as you were moving in the current, things were going by you like ruptured propane tanks. Well, when they hit something, they would explode like a bomb.
And you could hear from where we were people screaming and the river running and this and that, and then pretty soon they wouldn't scream anymore.
There was a great big chunk of the roof hanging up in a cottonwood tree about a quarter of a mile east of here, and we measured it, and it measured 27 feet from that piece of roof down to the creek bottom. So that's how deep the water got coming through this area here.
I looked ahead and I thought, my God, that's a house coming down the road. How can there be a house in the road?
2-story houses were floating like a cork, just bobbed away.
Lots and lots of thunder and lightning and people screaming and yelling, "Help, help," and there's no way you could help them.
It looked like it'd been hit by bombs.
There was just not a single board left of the house.
The magnitude, I didn't have a clue there were going to be 230 plus people die.
Terrible experiences. Finding people was just like picking up jello. They were so broke up from the water just beating them up.
It was almost like, well, I don't know, like death was hanging over the whole area.
Friday, June 9th, 1972. An air mass pushes up the eastern slopes of South Dakota's Black Hills. Powerful thunderstorms develop. Winds are weak, so the storms hover over the mountains. Some locations receive 15 inches of rain in 6 hours. Flood warnings are issued, but no one comprehends the scale of what's about to happen. A flood surge, like a liquid avalanche, rolls down Rapid Creek toward Rapid City. 50 years ago, one of the nation's deadliest natural disasters begins. Around 9 p.m., rain is falling and the water is rising in Rapid Creek. 29-year-old Rapid City Mayor Don Barnett is on the city's west side, monitoring the situation.
I had not put the warning out yet, and I went to the upper levels of Canyon Lake, where there was an old wooden bridge that crossed at the very top of Canyon Lake, and it was about 300 yards downstream from the fish hatchery. And I pulled off the side of the road and I saw a crew from Montana Dakota Utilities. and they were pulling on a industrial-sized wrench trying to get the natural gas service, which was attached to that old wooden rotten bridge. And so the manager of the gas company, George Miller, ran over. He said, "Come on, Mayor, give us a hand." So I stepped out, willing to help, and I would say within 5 seconds I was wet from the top of my head to the bottom of my toes. And we reached over there, and it was about a 6 or 7 foot wrench, and we all pulled on it, and we heard the crunch, 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 and within about a minute, we had that gas line blocked off. And we looked up and saw this small car. It was rolling in the creek and going up and down and underwater, and it looked to be in terrible danger. And George said, "My goodness, Don, I hope nobody's in that car." And then the car hit the wooden bridge and went under and got blocked with something. And a few minutes later, we were standing there. The crew was ready to move on to the next challenge. And George said, "My goodness, Don, somebody could get killed in this thing." And then I heard this crunch, and the bridge imploded and floated into the middle of Canyon Lake. And I looked at George, I said, "I'm going to find a phone and put out the warning right now."
Captain James Whitehead is sent west of Rapid City after a day of training with the National Guard.
We were down at the Daisy Dale Drive-In for supper that night when it started raining, and when I got home, it was all over the radio that we were supposed to report to our duty station. They dispatched a major and I was a captain at the time, up to Johnson Siding to see what the weather was like up there. And we got down this far on 44 where the water was running across the road from the other canyon there, so we couldn't even go any further. And then there was an older couple, would have been about 50 yards from where we left him, and they were just standing out there, and the water was about chest high then. And so I helped them get into a tree, and I figured it was about time for me to get into a tree, so I got up into one of these big oak trees here, and pretty dark, and all of a sudden something hit the tree, and it was a house that floated down and hit the tree, and I thought, whoa, boy, you know, it was really, I could feel the roots popping. And while I was in the tree, I'd just shake the tree every time one of them big roots would break. And I thought, well, if this tree goes over, my only choice is to jump on the roof of the house and see what happens after that. But it held, and then the water, you know, it just kept going, and it was just so noisy you couldn't hear something. I seen propane tanks, semis going down through here, houses. Whenever the lightning would light it up to where you could see, and it was just, it was really terrible.
Teenager Robbie Corner is out with friends looking at flood damage. When they return to his mother's creekside home on the city's far western edge, they find it surrounded by fast-moving water.
So we stood there and debated, you know, should we try to get to the house? But about that point, houses started washing by where we were standing there, and propane tanks were hitting trees and exploding, and people were on the roofs of the houses that were floating by, and they were screaming. And so, you know, we could just see there's no way we're going to be able to get to the house, and hoped that they had gotten out of there while we were gone. The water was just washing over the highway down here. It was coming out of Nameless Cave Road and that canyon, and it was just like pouring over the highway embankment right here down into this canyon. And I can remember that it sounded like a freight train. I mean, you couldn't just talk in a normal voice. You had to like yell because that was so loud. And so before too long, some National Guard were going up the highway there, and I guess we were yelling at them to see if there's any way they could, you know, do something to see if my mom and my neighbors had escaped, and they said there was nothing they could do, and they also told us we couldn't stay there where we were standing. And so we put up an argument, but they basically just grabbed us and hauled us up the hill. And the house, which is now Mid-States camper sales, was owned then by a family by the name of Pasica, and so they took us up to that house, and all night long they were bringing in other people into that house.
Dave Baumberger is moving items out of his father's low-lying home along Rapid Creek.
And we came in, my dad and an old friend of the family and me, and we walked in and we walked to the house, and we started getting some stuff out of the house. And the water started coming up in higher than we were comfortable with, and we decided we should get out. And there was a neighbor family next to my folks that had 3 boys and the mother and father, and there was a lady across. They lived on a small cul-de-sac with 4 houses. There was a lady across that was left there too, and we tried to walk out, and the water was coming up too fast to get walked out, so we decided we'd go to the highest house, which was the lady across the cul-de-sac. And we got in the house, and we were waiting for a rescue or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, the water kept coming up, and when the refrigerator started floating in the kitchen, we found a way to get into the attic, and we got up into the attic of the house. The water was coming up in 3 or 4 foot increments at a time. It wasn't just a steady, slow rise. So eventually the house started shifting off the foundation and started breaking apart, and we were all in the attic at that time, and the roof broke apart. And to be honest with you, I don't know what happened with everybody else. I got out through the fracture in the roof. I got out of the house and I got carried by the water down to the lake shore, and I got hung up in a tree. And so I stayed in the tree until the tree next to me tipped over. And the lightning was flashing bright enough that night that it just lit everything up like daylight when it did flash. And in one of the flashes of lightning, there was a big inner tube come floating by, and I made a jump for it because I figured, well, my tree's next if that tree went, and I missed it. And I got out in the lake, and I was swimming to the shore, and I'm guessing I was maybe 20, 25 feet offshore, and the dam broke.
The Canyon Lake Dam holds back Rapid Creek on the city's west side. Stream gauges above the lake record a rise of 13 feet in 4 hours. At about 10:45 p.m., the Canyon Lake Dam ruptures. Dave Baumberger is in the lake when it happens.
I knew because the way the water went. The water just started rushing out. I mean, immediately. So I went down and through where the dam was in the spillway, and I don't know, I was swimming, but I didn't know if I was swimming up or down half the time, to be honest with you. And after that, I just started bouncing off stuff going downstream, and I wound up down close to where the mortuary is on Jackson Boulevard.
About a mile downstream of the dam, Pastor Ron Masters and his wife LaVon are preparing to evacuate with their 5 children, including their oldest daughter Karen.
Well, when we decided to leave, there was water gushing downstairs. Yeah. Don't you remember that?
Yeah, it was coming into our basement, and we had a Mercury, and then we had a 65 International 4-wheel drive. And I said, let's take the 4-wheel drive. So we got out and got in it, and then came just across the bridge, and the current caught us. If we'd had another...
The first wall of water came.
If we'd had another 15 seconds or less, we'd have been ahead of it. But the first wall of water caught us and swept us right across over here in the trees, right over there.
The picture doesn't show it real well, but we were kind of backed up against 3 trees.
Yes, the back bumper of the tree.
That's why I think we didn't
get flooded. That tree held it. It was about that much of the back bumper that kept us forced between these 2 trees.
You know what's interesting though, I just want to say, in our vehicle, there was peace. we all were telling each other that we loved each other. And we all thought we were going to be in heaven together, was what we thought, because we thought there was no way to get out. And then Dad just felt really prompted to move and get some of us out.
Because I had in the vehicle, I had my nose to the ceiling already, and I said to God, God, are you really through with me? Is this time for me to come home?
And it was about then that Stephen, our oldest son, said to his dad, he said, Dad, this is all in God's hands.
And that's the last word we heard him say.
And then Jonathan said to me, he said, I just love you so much.
Oh, he came up and hugged your neck.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I, that's when I said, God, are you through with me? That's when I just started acting without thinking. I it was just like everything was automatic then. That's when I let my legs float up over Levon and kicked the window on the opposite side where I was sitting, and then was able to get out through that, reach down and pull her out, and then reached in for Karen.
While Ron is pulling 14-year-old Karen out of the vehicle, the raging current sweeps 2-year-old Timothy away.
And that was because I was holding him when I got pulled out.
And he was just 2.
So he was 2.5.
Yeah.
He was my buddy. We were buds.
Yeah.
And I lost him.
Water covers their car. Ron, Levon, and Karen struggle to survive in the roiling, debris-filled current. They fear the other children, Joanne, Stephen, and Jonathan, have not survived.
Once I got out of the vehicle,
yeah,
I had Levon where I held on to her with one arm like this from about 10:30 at night till 4 o'clock in the morning.
And I had a hold of a branch
of a tree and said to me several times in the night, honey, just let me go. And I said, I'm not going to let you go. And it was miraculous the way I could hang on to her. And Karen was like right where she is now. She was hanging on.
I climbed a little tree that was there.
She climbed a little tree that was being protected by one of these big ones. And so the water kind of swirled around her this way.
Rapid Creek continues its swollen rampage, knocking out electrical power and throwing flood victims into darkness. Tom Haggerty is in bed at his parents' home.
My dad started yelling for me at like 1 in the morning, got me out of bed, and we lived on Lanark Road, which is about not a full block from where the main force of the water came through. And the water was hitting the front of our house, and it was there was so much pressure that it was raising our garage doors. So my dad had me come out and help him tie down the garage doors. When we opened the ground level door from the garage, about 1.5 feet of water came falling into the house. Anyway, we closed up the garage doors. There was not any light. I mean, you know, if you've been in a cave and you know what it's like when they turn off the lights, that's what it was like that night, except there was this huge sound of water rushing, and I mean, it was just like this roar. And we went out on our back porch, since the water was going around both sides of our house, and it was probably a couple feet deep. And so we were on our back porch, and in our backyard is a pond. It's still there today. Well, the water was running straight back down behind our house, and it was very eerie because you could hear people screaming for help as they floated by, but I couldn't see you. I mean, it was so dark, you couldn't see anything past the length of your arm. Occasionally there would be lightning strikes, but even that you couldn't see because the clouds were so thick. And anyway, I stood there with my dad and my neighbor Fuzz Ewing, and talking about what could we do to help these people that we had heard screaming floating past. And we didn't have a rope. We couldn't see anything. It would have been suicide to try to go down, and you'd never found the people anyway. So it was just a horrible situation.
Just west of downtown, surging floodwater from Rapid Creek rises around a car filled with 6 teenagers. They pull into a parking lot near the multi-story Rushmore building, looking for protection.
As soon as we stopped the car behind Payless Shoe Store, Kay just instantly jumps out of the car and takes off running to the Rushmore building. And there was fire escape ladders in the back.
And I just ran, I saw the fire escape and it was like, well, that's off the ground, fire escape, it's safe.
And she made it. And I said, let's go. And just literally in seconds, the water's up to my knees and stuff, and the current is so strong, we couldn't make it.
So I got over here and got up there. Well, then I was hollering at him, but it was getting loud by then. And I was motioning and hollering, come over here. And Ed, the other gentleman that had gotten in the car with Gail and I, he tried to bring Gail over to me. But by that time, the water was too swift. They couldn't get through. So they went back over, were attempting to get up on top of the roof when the wall of water came.
So we're back there, we're looking for a tree or anything that we can get up on. And then I spot some plumbing pipes coming out of the top corner of the building. And I said, I can get in my car and I'll pull it up next to the side of the building. Then I can jump up on the roof and I can grab those pipes and I'll pull you guys all up. Well, as soon as I went over the car and opened up the car door, I looked up and the back wall of the building blew out.
Ed Healy and Gail Nemeti are standing near the wall when it blows out. Their bodies are found later.
I saw the wall come down, wash out, and take Ed and Gail he was trying to help her up there, and I saw them and shoeboxes the inside of the building, and so then I ran up. That's when I ran from here up to the next one because I couldn't get in this door. So I ran up to the next one, and that door was open.
The car shot straight back into a tree. I was hanging on to the car door, and then I see Randy and John are on the back bumper still hanging on. So I worked my way back to them, and as we're hanging on to the bumper, well, the water just keeps increasing, and it's shooting over the roof of the car, and it's like being underneath a waterfall. It was drowning us. And we looked at each other, and we said, I hope to see you again tomorrow. And we all just let go and took off.
Arlene Mattis is in a vehicle with her husband, Jack, her sister, Millie Raywalt, and Millie's husband, Gene. They reach the center of town and encounter high water. Their car stalls, so they get in with another man who's driving by.
He got us all up there, and there was a rack on top of the car, and we all five got up there and floated on that car until a little roof came by, because there was some kind of a little camping thing, I think, was at that intersection at the time. And so we got on this roof. When that roof came by, we five got on this roof. And then we floated a while on there, and a bigger roof come by, and we all stepped across and got on there because we were a little higher up from the water. And we were on there for a while, and all the while these gas tank things were going by, and fire and logs, and then about that time a kind of a little smaller house came, and it came by us, so we all got on there, and about the time we all got on there, it split, and my husband just got over with us. We were all on there, and when it's where he split, he just stepped across, and half of it went down the creek, and then we kept going on down. We were not too far from Omaha, heading east on this house, and then a bigger house came. It was a little bigger, so we all crawled up on that house, and then we floated on that for a while, and then a bigger house came, and we all got on that bigger house, and then this house was big enough that it went down about well, Rice Cycle was across the street. We were about right where Rice Cycle was, on the other side of Omaha. And this house wedged up against a tree. And there was 2 big trees, I think, and then there was a trailer house that was kind of wedged. And our house caught there, and that's where it stayed.
Denny Bowles is at A&B Welding Supply playing cards with coworkers. They plan to spend the night protecting the store's merchandise from high water.
I heard a knock at the back door and went to the back door to see who it was. It happened to be one of our employees' wives, and she says, well, he happened to be in Sioux Falls, on the way back from Sioux Falls with a transport. And she said, well, tell Joe that we're going to go to the church. The police just told us to evacuate. So we were by the back door of the building, which was on the north side. And we looked out at the pickup she was driving, and the pickup was already starting to float. And she had her 2 girls in the pickup. So myself and the other employee ran out, and we got the girls out of the pickup, headed back to the store. And when we got back to the store, we turned around and looked, and the pickup was floating away already. And then we saw our neighbors, which was right to the south of the building. They were walking, they were trying to cross New York Street, and they couldn't get across. So we let them in the building. And we no more got in the building, we heard something crack, and I turned around and looked, in the cinder block building, which was on the west side of the building, cracked, and it started coming in. So we headed to the east, the front of the building, which was on the east side, to get it out. And we got to the front of the building, and we couldn't get the door open because there was so much pressure on the building itself. So my boss, Harold, kicked the glass out, and he went out, and the neighbors went out, a man, woman, and their son. And then they just went into the dark. We just lost them. That's when we got pushed up in the corner and climbed up on the counter and stayed there all night long. And the water was coming up inside the building, getting deeper and deeper, and I kicked the plate glass window out, the front window out, to let the water release and let it run through. And we stood on that counter, should I say, and I had one of the girls, and the other employee had the other girl, and that was midnight. And we watched houses floating by with people with flashlights and people hollering, and you could see the flashlights in the upper windows. These were 2-story houses. We see propane tanks floating by with a fire shooting out of them. The National Guard was here. They were following the creek down, and they were shooting their flares, so everything had an orange glow.
Dolores Allen flees to higher ground with her husband and nephew before the flood surge comes, but she can't convince her mother and others to leave a house near the creek.
While we was walking away from the house, it was raining, and it was like people were like being poured on, buckets of water were being poured on us, but we wrapped up my nephew in some plastic. And so that was really a huge downpour. And then my mother, I guess she looked out the window and she seen waves coming. She was seeing like Hawaii Five-0. So she said, she's right. She's, we better get out of here. And my aunt said, no, I'm going to stay, where it's warm. And my mother and my cousin went running towards Philadelphia Street, where my mother's house is. And they reached it, and she could hear a thud, and she knew my cousin she hit a tree. Of course, she died. And then my mother hung on to the porch, up to the ceiling, the rafters. She hung there. She said she had to grab onto something. But she was saying she was praying and asking for her to let her. She said, let me live. I've got grandchildren and stuff like that. And she was up there, but, the water was still coming up. So she heard, her neighbor crying out for help. And finally the rescue boat came by and seen them and picked them up. Yeah. But my cousin was gone.
As the water begins to recede after a night of terror, survivors take stock of the situation. Local veterinarian Keith Johnson joins friends to look for people in need of help.
Stan Lieberman showed up with a boat
right here on the west side of Bennett Clarkson Hospital. And Bill Grothe was here, so the three of us were in his boat and thought we'd do what we could to find some survivors. So basically that's got us to this point where we did see this Matthew Vanderbeek.
Matthew Vanderbeek is 14 years old. His father, mother, and brother have died in the flood, leaving him as the family's sole survivor.
Hanging in a tree, shivering and shaking and worried about his family more than anything else. But his family got into a boat and family perished. But the house stayed intact if they'd stayed with the house. He's in the upper branches, and I'm sure he went by various trees trying to find to get out of the water, but he managed to get up in that tree and was hanging on.
Robbie Corner takes shelter for the night with others in a house high above the creek, hoping his mother has survived. The flood surrounded her home.
First light, my friends and I, we walked out of the house and down to the edge of the highway and looked over, and we could see that if you get rid of that carport, basically what we were looking at from up there was what you're looking at right here. There was just not a single board left of the house. And so, you know, we really didn't know what happened to anybody. Strangely enough, that house never got hit. And so what happened was it kicked a wall out, but the house remained there. And so again, the speculation is that nothing floated down and hit it, but I'm sure where this house was located here, there was a lot of houses coming down, hitting, you know, one house hitting another house and so on and so forth, and everything getting knocked off its foundation. So I had a neighbor that was renting a house right over here at the time, and he had walked out here from town to see what was going on with his place. And so we said, well, let's walk into Rapid City and see what's going on and see if, you know, we can get to a telephone or something to let my sister know, try to let my sister know what was my situation and my relatives that lived here in Rapid. So we walked into town, and it was, you know, it was just a nightmare. There was fish laying all over the highway from Canyon Lake and the creek. So one of the friends I was with was Steve Mills, and so we walked over to his house. He lives near Stevens High School, and it was up, you know, away from any flooding or anything. And the telephones worked and so forth, so I called up to my uncle's house on Frontier Drive, and I told them, I said, here's where I am, and do you know what's going on with my sister? And they had heard from her, and she was alive. And so, but I hadn't heard anything about my mother. Well, probably about, I don't know, 4 or 5 p.m. that day, my uncle's neighbor from up on Frontier Drive came over to Mills's house because he knew where we were to pick me up and take me up to my aunt and uncle's, and he said, you know, they found your mom a little bit earlier, and she'd washed a number of miles down the creek. They found her body.
Dave Baumberger is about 2 miles downstream. The house he's in breaks apart, sending 9 people into the water.
I got out of the mainstream and off to the side, and there was a pickup stranded with a family in it, and I couldn't pull myself into the back end of the pickup. They were in the box, and I finally, they got me drug in over the side somehow or another, and so until the water receded, we stayed in the back end of that pickup. It was me and one of the boys from the family that survived that night, and 7 died.
Ron and Lavon Masters and their daughter, Karen, hold on to trees in the water all night after their car is submerged. They've seen 2-year-old Timothy swept away by the current. They fear the same has happened to their other children, Stephen, Joanne, and Jonathan.
I heard a voice under my feet. I couldn't believe I heard a voice, and so I laid my cheek in the water, and I spoke up to the window, and I said, "Who is it? Who is it?" And Joanne was how old at that time?
She was eight.
8. Came floating
she
right
was
across
10.
and came right
Oh,
up
she
and
was
looked
10.
in my
No,
eyes.
She was 10.
She was
I'll
10.
never forget the look in her eyes.
Because she thought she was the only one left.
Because her 2 brothers had died beside her.
They had suffocated.
The funeral director told us there was no water in their lungs at all.
My sister actually had to move them when they died. So she has her own story to tell, but she had to move them aside.
Well, she tried to talk to them.
But
and
they talked
didn't
for a
answer.
while.
Yeah,
they talked
for a while, and then they didn't answer. But one of them was sitting. I don't know. The scout had seats on the side, and one of them was sitting there. And she actually had to move him so that she could keep her feet. So because she was in a wall of water, or the water was like up to here to her, and she just had her head up at the ceiling.
And that's
So-
where
And
she
there
lived
wasn't
for
enough
many
air.
hours.
Well,
Yeah.
there wasn't enough air for 3 of them to survive.
No,
There was only enough air for one.
Our little 2-year-old son that had floated all the way through Rapid City and was found clear out where the Open Bible Church is now. Do you know where it is out east? He was caught up in a tree up there, and the only way he was identifiable was his little Minnesota Twins jacket that Vaughn had put on him before we left off.
I don't think you ever get over it. Ever, ever, ever. Because they're part of you. And to lose a child is probably the most traumatic of any death.
Tom Haggerty listens helplessly through the night to screaming in his neighborhood. In the morning, he walks to his father's business, Haggerty's department store, near the creek in central Rapid City.
Basically, our store was that size, not quite as wide, but the entire front of that building was glass panels. So it was a huge glass front on that store, and all the glass was gone. And the parking lot, of course, was full of mud. It was full of the broken fixtures from the store. When I walked through the front, which used to be, a wall of windows, there was about 2 to 3 feet of mud in the store, and everything was gone. I mean, it was a 40,000 square foot store, and there was no merchandise left visible except what happened to be mounted up on the walls above about a 5-6 foot level. There's still some product hanging up there, but everything else was just a mud. And my dad and his main employees were standing in front of the store and just kind of this helpless look on their face, like, what do we do?
Kay Schriever escapes rising floodwater and runs up a fire escape into the multi-story Rushmore building just west of downtown Rapid City.
I literally ran into, because it was dark, couldn't see anything. I just felt my way down the hall, and I ran into some people. And it was the people that were from the radio station that was here. And they had moved up to that floor, or maybe they were on that floor. I don't know, because I'd never been in the building or anything. And there was, I know, at least one lady, because she was trying to comfort me. I told her that my friends were out here, help, my friends are out here and everything. And I don't remember if she came with me or not, but like I said, I went in and out a few times.
5 teens with Kay Schriever are trapped by the flood. Ed Healy and Gail Nemetti die when the wall of a nearby store blows out. The other 3, Mike Faust, Randy Shacklet, and John Dengis, are swept downstream.
But I lucked out and I shot down almost I went down basically about where Founders Park is right now, and the current started pulling me back into the stream. Well, I managed to grab one of those big oak trees there, and I was hanging on for dear life. And literally, this is the truth. The current was so strong, I had slip-on boots, like Beetle boots or something, and the water completely stripped me from the waist down. So when they found me the next day, I was basically naked from the waist down, but my t-shirt had stretched down so much, it was down to my knees, so it was like a dress. John was swept all the way down to by where the packing plant bridge is down there. And he was caught up in the bridge and debris, and somebody, he told me, threw him a rope, but he couldn't pull him out because of the current and the debris and stuff. So he literally said this guy hooked this rope up to a car or a truck or something and pulled him through.
Randy Shacklett's body was found later, farther downstream. Among the 6 teens in Mike Faust's car on the night of the flood, 3 died and 3 lived. Arlene Mattis spends the night moving from one piece of floating debris to another. She ends up on a floating house that wedges against some trees, surrounded by the flood.
And then my husband said, well, he looked and he saw there was a attic window right below, and he knocked that out, and we all crawled in there, so it was warmer, and so that's where we spent the rest of the night then. And then I don't know what time it was, but I stayed real close to the window, and I would holler, help every once in a while, and every time I hollered help, you could hear help all the way down far away, people wanting help. And we stayed there until, I don't know if it was getting light. I think it was still pretty dark. And we heard a boat. Somebody was coming with a boat, and they went by, and we hollered at them, and they said, well, that they would just stay here, we'll be back. And then they came back and got us.
Denny Bowles spends the night standing on a display counter in the flooded A&B welding supply store where he works. Denny and a coworker help rescue a woman and her 2 daughters. They spend the night in the flooded store and all survive.
Pretty much it destroyed our building. We only had one standing wall. All the merchandise inside was lost. A lot of that the next day after I got home, I had cut my finger pretty bad, my thumb, that is. I got home and got cleaned up and got something to eat and got a ride back down here. We started looking for the owner of the company, Harold Elliott, and because he was missing. And we didn't find him at all. We did see the neighbors that we had let in. We saw them the next day. They were okay. But Harold had lost his life in the flood.
In 1972, there are 2 hospitals in Rapid City. One of them, Bennett Clarkson, is flooded. For several days, hundreds of injured people are brought to St. John's McNamara. Sharon Weber is a nurse and the manager of the emergency department.
At the emergency entrance, there was a big canopy across that connected over to the nurse's home. And one of the doctors and a nurse was assigned to be out there on triage and tell them whether to come into the ER or where to go, whether to go across the street to where they were keeping people. And if they were deceased, the doctor checked them and told them to go which morgue to go to. And it was a foggy, dreary, spooky night. It was just I still have that eerie feeling from that night. But then we worked and we worked on people. A lot of kids came in that needed tetanus shots, and we sewed up lots of lacerations. Some were in their night clothes, and some their clothes were muddy and wet, and just I can still see the faces of some of those, just scared to death.
Ozzie Osheim works at the flooded Catron Funeral Home. He goes to help the morning after the flood at the Campbell Paula Funeral Home.
Well, it was chaos. You can imagine. Now, in the course of a normal year, the 3 funeral homes in town at that time would probably handle plus or minus around 300 funerals, 300 funerals between the 3 firms. Now, overnight, or say, from day 1 until the last body was found, you had 238 cases. There were only 11 licensed funeral directors on staff at the 3 funeral homes. And fortunately, the funeral profession responded beautifully. Within the next number of days, We had approximately 55 funeral directors from Rapid City, the Black Hills region, the state of South Dakota, and about a 5-state region. About 55 funeral directors came in and volunteered their time to assist us.
Within a couple of days, the Catron Funeral Home where Ozzie Osheim works is back up and running and receiving bodies.
Obviously, there weren't enough tables in which to place everyone up off the ground. So we neatly put sheeting, blanketing on the floor, and as a body was prepared, that it was brought to the building, been brought downstairs, was properly cleaned, bathed, embalmed, then the body was placed on the unidentified section of the garage. When the public came to identify their loved one, we had nurses on duty, we had clergy on duty to help those who might need medical help, to help those who needed physical support. But the families would be taken into the garage, one family at a time. Usually just one or two of the family members would come in with us. A staff member would go with them. If the body was identified, it was properly marked and then placed in the identified section.
Kay Schriever is asked to identify the body of her friend, Gail Nemeti.
And she was on the floor in the garage. And it was her. But she wasn't all messed up or anything. I was so thankful. I just saw, like, bruises on the side of her face. And, you know, she was a muddy mess, but she was all there. And so I just felt in my heart that I hope she didn't suffer a lot.
The 3 funeral homes realized very shortly that it was going to be almost impossible to have a full funeral service for each and every family. So the 3 funeral homes sat down with the ministerial associations that were here in town at the time, and it was decided that they would offer graveside services only, not full services with a church service or a service in the chapel. Most families were content with that plan. Once one of us had sat down with the family, we would take care of all the paperwork for the death certificates and all the legal data. We would schedule a time for the service, and then in cooperation with the cemeteries, one funeral home would schedule their services on the hour, the second funeral home would schedule their services on the quarter hour, and the third funeral home would schedule their services on the half hour, so that we were all jammed together at the same time, trying to it made it easier for the cemeteries to accommodate everyone.
Some of the bodies are not easily identified. Dentists, including Gary Harms, use dental records to make identifications.
When people drowned, they bloat, and you cannot recognize them. So I took care of a lot of the people down there. One of my best friends was down there. He and his wife and son drowned that night. But anyway, I got all my dental records out because that's the only way you can find out specifically who people are. And so they had a 18-wheel trailer there at the morgue, and they kept bringing people in, and you know, if I thought I knew something about where they were or whatever, then I'd get their records out, and it was just a terrible ordeal.
James Whitehead flies a National Guard helicopter into the wreckage, retrieving bodies.
That's the only way we could get into some of these places, you know, especially down by Bacon Park. That was really a lot of mess down there, and people wrapped around trees, and then of course all the bushes and brush and limbs and stuff was piled around them. You literally had to pull them out of there, you know, because they're just entangled in there so much. And I remember this one 18-year-old girl, I'm sure she was about 18 years old. She had her leg completely tore off, and it was bad. You couldn't even imagine what it looked like. You couldn't even imagine. I mean, it looked like the World War II when they bombed in Syria, you know, and just all the destruction.
City workers spend the days after the flood repairing badly damaged utilities. They look for survivors and count the dead. 2 days after the flood, Mayor Don Barnett calls a meeting of the city council.
We got the council together in a small room in the courthouse. It had one little light bulb on the wire, and we were sitting around the table, but the reporters weren't there yet. I had told them about the meeting, and you just can't have meetings in South Dakota without the reporters in attendance. And they were on the way, but we got to talking to this federal employee, and he wanted to bring the muscle of the federal government in and repair about 700 mobile home pads. They had been located in mobile home camps or parks, they called them, but they were all damaged. They were undercut with water and mud and crap, and sewer lines were broken, water lines were broken, the power was out, the telephone poles were on the ground. It was just like war. And so he said, I need authority from the council to use federal money to repair those 700 mobile home site locations. Leonard Swanson had been with the city since 1947, and he was public works director. He said, no, just real sharp like that. And he said, the council and the city cannot permit the reoccupation of the floodplain, because that would endanger so many lives. And he said we should never sentence, like a judge would sentence you to the gallows, we should never sentence the flood survivors to one more night on the suicidal floodplain. And Kay was there, my administrative assistant, and she wrote that down, and then I repeated it, and then she repeated it, and Swanee broke down in tears, and Dr. Lytle was president of the city council and deputy mayor, and he said, I think Swanee's right. We should not permit the federals to repair those mobile home parks. Maybe nobody should repair their homes near the creek. So he made a motion, and lo and behold, all 10 councilmen adopted that policy. We did not buy all of the land near the creek, but we certainly purchased all of the residential land by the creek, and then had a relocation program when the HUD people out of Denver granted Rapid City $48 million, and we used that to buy the places where 1,500 families had lived, and we converted that to an open space park that's 5 miles long and 5 blocks wide all the way through town. Now, when we have high water again in Rapid City, those parks will be damaged, but they won't be damaged to the tune of 700 destroyed mobile homes and over 1,000 wooden homes, because now it's a golf course, about 18 miles of hiking trails and biking trails and soccer fields and so many recreational things, and that floodplain park makes Rapid City one of the most beautiful cities in America. But with all this growth in Rapid City now, they're growing east, west, north, and south. My God, they're going to pull Rapid City into Meade County here before long, and clear to the air base. Box Elder was a mobile home park when I was mayor, and now it's an American South Dakota city. And all of that growth will turn around and put pressure on the council to again reoccupy the beautiful floodplain with residential housing of all varieties. And as long as I'm alive, I'll be at those public hearings to remind the people about the stupidity of the platting and the zoning and the bad land use patterns that were in place at 5 o'clock on June 9th in the evening hours. Because by 5 o'clock a.m., they weren't there anymore.
It was 72 on June the 9th, when the rain that fell made the waters rise. Canyon Lake lost its dam that night and took all but higher ground. They found him on Jackson Boulevard, ankle deep in their own front yard. They prayed to God the car could start, and they went for higher ground. If I ever learned a thing from my father, it's never fear hell or high water. Even when there's problems all around, you just look for the higher ground. I remember the lies that people swore, turning from love to brandish their swords. I remember you stood without saying a word, and you took the higher ground. 'Cause if I ever learned a thing from my father, it's never fear hell or high water. 'Cause even when there's problems all around, you just look for the higher ground.